ASUS ROG Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White Opinion. ASUS is a Taiwan-based computer hardware and electronics company founded in 1989. Originally released in early 2020, the Strix Impact 2, see here for our review, has since been released in two new editions, namely Electro-Punk and Moonlight White. Naturally, this begs the question whether anything has changed on these aside from their looks, especially since the Moonlight White is even listed as its own SKU. On paper, the Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White is still equipped with PixArt's PA3327 capable of 6200 CPI, hot swappable main button switches, and rich RGB lighting, the latter of which can be configured with an Armoury crate. The ROG Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White is part of an entire roster of identically themed products, which are the ROG Strix Scope NXT-KL keyboard, Strix Go Core headset, Cetera 2-core in-ear headphones, and Zephyrus G14 and G15 gaming laptops. The ASUS ROG Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White is available for $49.99. Pro. Great sensor performance. Very high button quality. Good scroll wheel. Good choice of components. Grippy materials. Nicely gliding feet. Full software customizability. Rich RGB lighting. Easily swappable main switches. Contra. High click latency. Stiff cable. Armoury crate. Loose lens on my sample. 2 years is already a long time in the real world, but in the world of gaming mice, it's an eternity. When it released in 2020, the Strix Impact 2 was a genuinely good budget option that even offered premium features, such as hot swappable main button switches. In particular, the Strix Impact 2 shine with its excellent main buttons, dependable sensor, and solid yet reasonably lightweight build. The main criticisms were the stiff cable and high click latency. Naturally, one would expect that these two items would be addressed for a new color variant SKU released 2 years later. But sadly, that is not the case. These days, people expect a soft, braided cable, along with a click latency well below 10 ms, both of which the Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White is unable to provide. Click latency being untouched in particular is difficult to understand, as lowering it would not require a hardware change whatsoever, but instead simply adjusting a few values within the firmware. Now, that would be less of an issue if the Moonlight White would be offered at an accordingly lower price, but that is not the case, either. ASUS still charges $49.99 for an essentially 2-year-old mouse, which isn't even close to being competitive when looking at the countless offerings with better cables, better sensors, and lower click latency around this price point these days. The fact that click latency has not been touched is doubly curious given that another point of criticism on the original Strix Impact 2, namely CPI deviation, has been addressed. Why fix one thing but not the other? Even more curious is that the Moonlight White even regressed in some aspects. The original Strix Impact 2 came out at a point where Armoury 2 was still a thing, which allowed one to control each of the lighting zones individually. The Moonlight White, on the other hand, is supposed to be used with Armoury crate, and for whatever reason, the ability to independently control the lighting zones is gone now. While this may not be that big a deal, I'd still maintain that on a mouse that is all about its looks, being able to adjust the RGB lighting in greater detail would be a welcome addition, especially since the Strix Impact 2 could do it just fine 2 years ago. On top of that, Armoury crate is still a nightmare to deal with, so aside from potentially making use of Aura Sync, there is very little benefit to having Armoury crate instead of good old Armoury 2. Overall, I'm not sure what demographic ASUS had in mind when conceiving the Moonlight White. Those who got the Strix Impact 2 2 years ago likely aren't too interested in paying $50 for a mouse that isn't any different aside from the color. Meanwhile, for those who don't have a Strix Impact 2, the Moonlight White simply doesn't offer anything compelling or worthwhile. Granted, the crispy yet pleasantly light main buttons are still very nice, but for $50, there are much better options available these days, and the original Strix Impact 2 is regularly on sale, too. The Strix Impact 2 Moonlight White is not a bad mouse, but after 2 years, I simply expected more than a new color.